Your soulmate hired a psychic to uncover your past. They froze when she revealed you are. Stop scrolling for a moment, because what your soulmate thought would be a simple reading turned into something they were completely unprepared to hear. They went into that room looking for answers about you, but before they walked out, they were forced to confront something about their own feelings that frightened them even more than your past ever could. And listen carefully, because in this fictional story, they did not visit this psychic because they wanted to expose you, embarrass you, or discover some terrible secret. They went because there was something about you they could not explain. Something about the way they felt whenever you entered their thoughts. Something about the strange familiarity they experienced around you even when logic told them they should not feel so connected. They had tried ignoring it. They had tried calling it attraction. They had tried convincing themselves that maybe they were simply lonely, curious, or emotionally overwhelmed. But none of those explanations lasted. Every time they created distance from you, something quietly pulled their thoughts back. Every time they told themselves to forget you, some small reminder appeared. A song. A dream. A familiar phrase. A memory arriving at exactly the wrong moment. And eventually their curiosity became stronger than their resistance. They wanted to understand why you affected them differently. So last night, without telling you, they sat across from someone who claimed she could read emotional patterns, hidden histories, and the unresolved energy people carry from one chapter of their lives into another. Your soulmate expected vague answers. They expected to hear something comforting and general. Maybe that you were compatible. Maybe that you were emotionally guarded. Maybe that the connection needed patience. What they did not expect was for the psychic to become completely silent only moments after the reading began. The room itself was quiet. Nothing frightening. Nothing dramatic. A small table. Soft lighting. The person you love sat there almost feeling foolish for coming. Part of them wanted to laugh at themselves. They had never imagined becoming so confused by another person that they would seek answers from a stranger. But another part of them was serious. Because you had awakened questions they could not answer alone. The psychic asked them to explain almost nothing. Just your first name and why they had come. Your soulmate hesitated before answering. There's someone, they finally said. The psychic smiled slightly. Someone you love? That question made them uncomfortable immediately. Love was still a word they had avoided using. They preferred safer language. Connection. Attraction. Feelings. Something complicated. Something unfinished. But love? Love created responsibility. Love meant admitting that losing you could hurt. So they answered, I don't know. The psychic looked at them for a second and said, you wouldn't be sitting here if you didn't already know more than you're admitting. Your soulmate shifted in their chair. They had barely started, and already the reading felt more personal than expected. Still, they continued. They explained that something about you felt different. That sometimes they felt like they understood you without words, while at other times you seemed impossible to read. They admitted that they had become afraid of how much mental space you occupied. They admitted there were moments when they almost reached out just because they suddenly felt you might need them. And then, embarrassed by their own honesty, they stopped talking. The psychic did not laugh. She simply asked, "What are you afraid of discovering?" Your soulmate answered immediately, "That I'm imagining all of it." But the moment they said it, they realized there was another fear underneath. What if they were not imagining it? What if the connection was real enough that eventually they would have to do something about it? The psychic began the reading. Again, remember, this is a fictional spiritual story, but inside that story, what happened next completely changed the atmosphere. At first, she spoke about your soulmate, not you. She described someone who had learned to protect themselves emotionally. Someone who could appear calm while internally thinking about everything. Someone who had experienced enough disappointment to believe that control was safer than vulnerability. Your soulmate listened carefully. Some details felt accurate enough to make them uncomfortable. Then the psychic suddenly stopped. She looked down for several seconds. Your soulmate asked, "What?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she asked them something strange. "Has this person ever told you much about their past?" Your soulmate thought about you. They knew pieces. Stories here and there. Certain experiences you had mentioned. Things you had laughed about. Things you had clearly avoided. But they realized they did not actually know the entire road that had made you who you were. "Not everything," they answered. The psychic nodded slowly. Then she said, "That makes sense." Those 3 words instantly made your soulmate nervous. "Why?" they asked. Again, the psychic paused. "Because this person learned a long time ago that not everyone deserves access to their deepest story." That sentence stayed in the air. Your soulmate thought about all the times you had almost opened up and then stopped. They remembered moments when a conversation touched something personal and your expression changed. Maybe you smiled and redirected the subject. Maybe you said, "It's a long story." Maybe you told them you were fine even though something in your eyes suggested there was more. Your soulmate had sometimes interpreted that as distance. Maybe even mistrust. But suddenly they wondered whether your privacy had nothing to do with them personally. Maybe it was something you learned through experience. The psychic continued. They have been misunderstood before. Your soulmate leaned forward slightly. How? The psychic replied, "People saw the strength but not what created it." That sentence hit differently. Because your soulmate had always noticed your strength. Your independence. The way you could carry yourself even when something was clearly bothering you. The way you rarely begged anyone to understand you. But perhaps they had never asked where that strength came from. They simply assumed it was your personality. Now another possibility appeared. Maybe strength was something life had demanded from you before it became something you naturally wore. And suddenly your soulmate felt less curious about discovering some secret and more curious about understanding the person underneath everything they already knew. Then the psychic said something that made them sit completely still. "The person you're asking me about has walked away from something before that most people would have stayed trapped inside." Your soulmate's expression changed. "What does that mean?" The psychic shook her head gently. "I'm not talking about one specific event I can prove to you. I'm describing the pattern I'm seeing. This person knows how to leave situations that require them to betray themselves in order to stay. Your soulmate immediately thought about you. Your boundaries. The way you could care deeply and still become quiet when respect disappeared. The way you sometimes seemed capable of walking away even when your feelings were strong. That part of you had confused them. They had wondered whether your ability to detach meant you did not love as deeply as they did. But now they were hearing another interpretation. Maybe you did not walk away because you felt nothing. Maybe you walked away because somewhere in your past, you learned what happens when you keep abandoning yourself to keep someone else. And this is where your soulmate's reason for coming to the psychic began changing. They had arrived wanting to know your past. Now they were starting to question their own behavior toward you. Because if you had learned not to remain indefinitely inside uncertainty, what did that mean for the way they had been treating this connection? They thought about every mixed signal. Every delayed response caused not by busyness but fear. Every moment when they wanted to say something honest and instead became distant. What if you were noticing all of it? What if your past had taught you to recognize inconsistency much faster than they realized? And what if the quiet changes they had recently noticed in you were not random? What if you were already protecting yourself? Stay with me, because this was when the psychic said the first thing that truly made your soulmate freeze. She looked directly at them and said, "You think you're the one deciding whether this connection moves forward." Your soulmate said nothing. The psychic continued, "But the person you're asking about has already been watching your actions." Their heart began beating faster. "What do you mean?" "She is not waiting for a perfect person," the psychic said. "She is watching whether your words and your behavior belong to the same person." That sentence went straight through them. Because they knew there had been a gap. A painful gap. They had shown affection and then retreated. They had created closeness and then become frightened by it. They had looked at you as though you mattered and then sometimes behaved as though the connection could wait forever. And perhaps you had noticed every contradiction. The psychic said, "You came here wanting information about them because uncertainty makes you uncomfortable. But have you considered how much uncertainty you may have created for them?" Your soulmate could not answer. Because suddenly the reading no longer felt like it was revealing you. It was revealing them. If you enjoy these emotional fictional soulmate stories, subscribe and stay close, because what the psychic says next is the part your soulmate was not prepared for. They thought they were about to discover a secret from your past, but instead they heard something that made them question whether you had already made a decision about their place in your future. Your soulmate finally asked, "Are they pulling away from me?" The psychic was quiet. That silence frightened them more than an immediate answer. Then she said, "I think you already know something has changed." Your soulmate's mind immediately returned to recent interactions. Maybe your messages had become shorter. Maybe you still cared, but you stopped reaching across every silence. Maybe you stopped trying to rescue conversations whenever they became awkward. Maybe the warmth remained, but the pursuit disappeared. At the time, your soulmate had told themselves you were busy. But now they wondered whether you had simply stopped carrying the connection alone. "Why?" they asked. The psychic replied, because people who have fought hard to rebuild themselves eventually become very careful about where they spend their emotional energy. There it was again. Your past. But not in the scandalous way your soulmate originally imagined. The psychic was not describing some shocking hidden wrongdoing. She was describing survival. Growth. A version of you that had apparently learned difficult lessons before they ever entered your life. Your soulmate became quieter. What happened to them? They asked. The psychic shook her head. That isn't mine to tell you. That answer surprised them. They had paid for answers, yet this stranger was refusing to invent details about your private life. She continued, if there is something specific from their past that matters to your relationship, they should be the one to tell you when they trust you enough. Your question should not be, what happened? Your question should be, have I become someone they would feel safe telling? Your soulmate felt their chest tighten. Because that question was much harder. They could not control your history. They could not demand access to it. But they could examine whether their behavior had created safety. And the answer was complicated. They had cared. Deeply. But caring and creating safety were not automatically the same thing. Sometimes they had been inconsistent. Sometimes they became emotionally unavailable precisely when the connection became meaningful. Sometimes they expected you to understand feelings they never clearly communicated. And now they were sitting in a room asking a stranger to reveal things about you because they had been too afraid to ask you directly. The irony was impossible to ignore. The psychic leaned back slightly and said, there is something else. Your soulmate looked up. What? This person has already forgiven more than you know. They froze. Me? The psychic did not answer that directly. Not necessarily only you. I'm talking about the way they move through life. They have learned that forgiveness and access are two different things. Your soulmate repeated the words silently. Forgiveness and access. The psychic explained, they can forgive someone and still decide that person no longer gets the same place in their life. And suddenly your soulmate understood something about you that had always confused them. You could be kind to someone you no longer trusted. You could wish someone well and still close the door. You could release anger without reopening a relationship. Your soulmate had perhaps mistaken your kindness for endless availability. Maybe they assumed that because you were patient, there would always be another chance. But the psychic was suggesting something very different. Your patience was not weakness. Your forgiveness was not permission. And your love did not guarantee permanent access to you. That realization frightened them. Because for the first time they asked themselves a question they had avoided completely. What if you loved them and still decided they were not healthy enough for your future? Love suddenly stopped feeling like a guarantee. And that changed everything. Your soulmate asked, do they love me? The psychic smiled slightly. You keep asking questions about their feelings because you're afraid to examine your choices. They looked almost offended. I just want to know. I know, she replied. But suppose I tell you yes. Then what? They were silent. She continued, would you finally become honest? Would you reach out? Would you stop disappearing whenever vulnerability becomes uncomfortable? Or would knowing they love you simply make you feel safe enough to keep waiting? That question hit them hard. Because maybe that was exactly what they had been doing. Searching for reassurance before taking emotional risk. Wanting proof from you before offering clarity themselves. They wanted certainty without vulnerability. But love rarely works that way. Sometimes somebody has to tell the truth before they know how the truth will be received. The psychic said, "You don't need another sign that they matter to you." Your soulmate looked at her. "You already know." And for perhaps the first time, they stopped resisting that truth. They loved you. That was why they were there. Not because they distrusted you. Because loving you had made uncertainty unbearable. But now they understood that investigating your past was not going to solve the real problem. The real problem was whether they were brave enough to participate honestly in your present. They looked down at their phone. Your name was there. They almost opened your conversation. But the psychic had not finished. She said, "Before you message them, there is one thing you need to understand." Your soulmate slowly put the phone back down. "What?" The psychic's expression became serious again. "The thing you are most afraid of about their past is probably the exact opposite of what you should be afraid of." They stared at her. She continued. "You came here worried there might be something hidden that would make you want to leave." A pause. "But what I see is someone who has already survived being left emotionally." Your soulmate stopped breathing for a moment. The psychic continued carefully. "They know what it feels like when someone is physically present but emotionally absent. They know what it feels like to question whether they are asking for too much simply because they are asking for consistency. And they promised themselves they would never stay indefinitely inside that kind of uncertainty again." Your soulmate felt their stomach drop. Because those words sounded dangerously similar to what they had been doing. Not intentionally. But repeatedly. Present one day. Distant the next. Warm when they felt safe. Silent when the connection became vulnerable. And suddenly they understood why something about you had recently changed. Maybe your past was not making you afraid to love them. Maybe your past was making you unwilling to chase them. That was different. Very different. Your soulmate asked, "So what are you telling me?" The psychic looked directly at them. "I'm telling you that if you want this person in your life, stop trying to uncover who they used to be and show them who you are willing to become." Silence. No dramatic prediction. No magical guarantee. Just a sentence your soulmate could not escape. They looked at their phone again. And this time, they understood what they needed to do. Not ask you about your secrets. Not interrogate your history. Not tell you they had visited a psychic and demand explanations. They needed to talk to you like a human being. Honestly. Directly. Without hiding behind signs, timing, or fear. They opened your conversation. They began typing. "I've been thinking about us." Deleted. Too vague. "I need to ask you something." Deleted. Too ominous. Then they remembered what the psychic had said. Stop asking for certainty before offering honesty. So they typed something completely different. I realize today that I've spent too much time trying to understand why you affect me instead of simply admitting that you do. They stared at the sentence. Their hearts started racing. Then they continued. You matter to me more than I've shown. Another pause. And I think my fear has probably made you feel the opposite. Their thumb hovered above the send button. They were about to press it when the psychic suddenly said, "Wait." Your soulmate looked up. What? She had gone unusually still. The expression on her face had changed. This was different from everything before. She looked almost confused by something she was sensing inside the fictional reading. Your soulmate slowly lowered the phone. What is it? The psychic did not answer immediately. Instead, she asked one final question. When you first met this person, did you feel like you recognized something about them before you actually knew them? Your soulmate froze. Because yes. They had never told anyone that. From the beginning, something about you had felt strangely familiar. Not your face. Not your voice. Something harder to explain. A feeling. A strange emotional recognition. Like meeting someone new and somehow feeling that the conversation had already begun somewhere you could not remember. They whispered, yes. The psychic leaned forward. And have you ever wondered why losing them frightens you more than relationships you've actually had for much longer? Again, your soulmate said nothing. They did not need to. The answer was written all over their face. The psychic looked down, then back at them. And finally she said the words that made your soulmate's entire body go still. You came here asking me to uncover their past. The psychic had one final word to describe exactly who you are now, and when your soulmate heard it, they did not respond immediately. They simply stared at her. The word itself was not frightening. It was not some dark secret from your history. It was not the shocking revelation they had imagined when they first decided to uncover your past. In fact, it was something much more difficult for them to accept, because it explained almost everything about the way you had been behaving lately. The psychic looked directly into their eyes and said, "Unrepeatable." Your soulmate frowned. What does that mean? She leaned back slightly. It means this person has reached a point where they will not repeat the same emotional lesson forever. They may love deeply. They may forgive. They may understand someone's fear better than most people ever could. But once they recognize a pattern they have already survived, they stop romanticizing it. Your soulmate went completely quiet. Because suddenly they understood why the reading had felt less like an investigation into your past and more like a warning about their present behavior. The psychic continued, "You were hoping I would tell you who hurt them, what happened, why they have certain walls. But those details are not the most important thing. The important thing is what they learned. And what they learned was this: love should not require someone to repeatedly prove they are worth choosing." Those words made your soulmate's stomach tighten. Worth choosing. They thought about you immediately. How many times had their hesitation made you question that? How many times had they created closeness and then retreated? How many moments had you been left trying to understand whether the connection was real while they privately knew exactly how deeply they felt? They had spent months believing they were the confused one. Now they wondered how confusing they had become for you. "Are you saying they're done with me?" your soulmate asked. The psychic shook her head. "I'm saying that is the wrong question." "Then what is the right question?" She answered without hesitation. "Are you willing to stop behaving like someone who only becomes courageous when they sense they might lose them?" That sentence landed harder than anything else she had said. Because your soulmate knew there was truth inside it. They had cared for a long time. But when had the urgency appeared? When you became quieter. When you stopped reaching as much. When something about your energy seemed different. When they began wondering whether you might actually move forward without them. Suddenly their feelings became impossible to ignore. And that realization made them uncomfortable. Was this love, or simply fear of losing access to someone who had always been available? They did not want to answer too quickly. The psychic seemed to understand what they were thinking. Fear of losing someone and love can exist at the same time, she said. The question is which one controls what you do next. Your soulmate looked down at their phone. The unfinished message to you was still sitting there. "You matter to me more than I've shown. And I think my fear has probably made you feel the opposite." They had not sent it yet. Their thumb hovered over the screen again. But before they could press send, they asked, "How do I know if I'm doing this because I love them or because I'm scared they're moving on?" The psychic gave an answer they did not expect. Ask yourself what you would want for them if their happiness did not guarantee your place in their life. Your soulmate became still. That was difficult. If your happiness required distance from them, could they respect it? If your growth led you somewhere they could not follow, could they still wish you well? If you needed time before trusting their sudden honesty, could they give it without becoming angry? If you chose them, they would obviously be happy. But could they care about your peace even when your peace did not immediately reward them? That was the difference between possession and love. And for perhaps the first time, your soulmate understood why this entire reading had become uncomfortable. They had come seeking information that would help them decide whether you were safe to love. But they were leaving with a different question: had they been safe for you to love? Stay here, because this was the moment the entire night shifted. Your soulmate finally pressed send. The message disappeared from the text box and appeared in the conversation. Delivered. There was no taking it back. Their heart immediately started racing. They almost regretted it. Not because the words were untrue, but because vulnerability always triggered the instinct to retreat. They looked at the psychic. "Now what?" She smiled slightly. "Now you don't manipulate the outcome." Your soulmate frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning you don't send 6 more messages because silence makes you uncomfortable. You don't demand reassurance. You don't turn honesty into pressure. You told the truth. Give them freedom to respond." That was harder than expected. Your soulmate stared at the screen. No typing indicator. Nothing. They imagined you reading the message. Maybe confused. Maybe touched. Maybe skeptical. maybe tired. And every possible reaction created a different story inside their head. But they did not send another message. For once, they waited. And while waiting, they asked the psychic something they had been curious about from the beginning. Why does this person feel so familiar to me? The psychic paused. You want me to tell you that you knew each other in another life, don't you? Your soulmate looked almost embarrassed. Maybe. She smiled. I can give you a mystical answer because that is what people expect in a room like this. But there is another possibility. What? Sometimes someone feels familiar because they touch emotional places inside you that have existed long before they arrived. Your soulmate listened carefully. They may remind you of safety you wanted. Honesty you avoided. A version of yourself you buried. Familiarity does not always mean you have met before. Sometimes it means someone reveals something inside you that you recognize. That explanation somehow felt more powerful than the fantasy your soulmate expected. Maybe you felt familiar because being around you made them recognize themselves differently. Maybe you made them want to communicate in ways they had never learned. Maybe your presence made them imagine a life where intimacy did not require losing independence. Maybe you were not a memory from some mysterious past. Maybe you were a mirror for a future version of themselves they had not yet become. Their phone vibrated. Your soulmate's entire body tensed. Your name appeared. You had responded. They opened the message immediately. What happened today? That was all you wrote. Your soulmate read it twice. You had noticed the unusual honesty immediately. Of course you had. They had spent so long being careful that one vulnerable message naturally made you wonder what had changed. They looked at the psychic. Should I tell them I came here? She laughed softly. That is your decision. Your soulmate stared at your message. They could easily avoid the truth again. They could say, nothing, I've just been thinking. Technically true. But incomplete. And this entire night had been teaching them what incomplete truth could do. So they typed, I did something a little strange. You replied quickly. How strange? For the first time that evening, they smiled. Then they wrote, I went to see a psychic because I thought maybe she could help me understand why I can't stop thinking about you. They stared at the sentence before sending it. Embarrassing? Absolutely. Honest? Completely. They sent it. Your response took longer. Then, you did what? Your soulmate almost laughed because they could practically hear your voice through the message. I know, they replied. It sounds ridiculous. You answered, and what exactly did you ask her? That was where embarrassment became guilt. They had to admit the uncomfortable part. I wanted to understand your past. Your response did not come immediately. The person you love felt their stomach tighten. They suddenly realized how invasive that could sound. So before you replied, they added, and I realized pretty quickly that I was asking the wrong questions. Your typing indicator appeared. What do you mean? They looked around the room. The psychic was quietly gathering something from the table, giving them space. Your soulmate typed, I was trying to understand why you are the way you are instead of asking whether the way I've treated you has given you any reason to trust me enough to tell me those things yourself. They sent it. Silence. Then you wrote something that made them stop completely. That is probably the most self-aware thing you've ever said to me. Your soulmate smiled, but the sentence also stung because it confirmed how emotionally guarded they had been. They replied, "I deserve that." You wrote, "I wasn't insulting you." I know. Another pause. Then your message, "So what did she tell you about me?" This was the question your soulmate had originally been waiting for. Hours earlier, they would have eagerly repeated every mysterious statement. Now something felt different. They replied, "Some things. But honestly, I don't want to tell you who a stranger thinks you are. I'd rather hear who you are from you." You stared at that message longer than they expected. Then you replied, "Okay. Who do you think I am?" That question changed everything. Because suddenly the psychic, the reading, the mysterious signs, all of it became secondary. This was about what your soulmate had actually observed. What did they know about you through experience? They began typing. "I think you're stronger than people realize, but I don't think you enjoy having to be strong all the time." They paused. "I think you forgive people more easily than you trust them again." Another line. "I think you notice inconsistency quickly, even when you don't confront it immediately." Their heart raced as they continued. "And I think when you start becoming quiet, it doesn't mean you stopped caring. Sometimes it means you're deciding whether caring is costing you too much." They sent it. You did not respond for nearly a minute. Then, "She told you that?" Your soulmate answered, "Some of it. The rest I think I already knew. I just wasn't paying enough attention." That sentence touched something in you. They could tell from your next response. "You noticed more than I thought." Your soulmate replied, "I noticed. I just didn't always know what to do with what I noticed." There was the pattern again. Awareness without action. Feelings without expression. Understanding without communication. But now the person you love was finally beginning to connect those things. You asked, "Why were you trying to uncover my past anyway?" They could have softened the answer. Instead, they told you the uncomfortable truth. "Because I was scared there was something I didn't know that would explain why you sometimes seem ready to walk away." Your response came almost immediately. "You could have asked me." 4 words. Simple. Devastatingly obvious. They closed their eyes. "I know." You wrote, "Would you have believed me?" That question made them think. Maybe part of them had been searching outside because asking you directly required trusting your answer. And trust was not only something you needed from them. They needed to practice it too. "I want to say yes," they replied. "But maybe that's part of what I need to work on." You did not attack them. You simply wrote, "At least that's honest." If you enjoy these fictional soulmate stories where the mystery slowly becomes an emotional revelation, subscribe and stay close, because the conversation that follows is where your soulmate finally hears the truth about your past from the only person who has the right to tell it, you. And what you reveal is not what they were expecting. After several minutes, you sent another message. Do you actually want to know why I walk away when things become inconsistent? Your soulmate sat up straighter. This was it. The thing they had paid a stranger hoping to understand was now being offered freely by you. But notice the difference. You were choosing to tell them. That mattered. Yes, they answered. Then added, but only what you're comfortable telling me. You noticed that too. The absence of entitlement. The recognition that your story belonged to you. So you began carefully. There was a time when I believed loving someone meant understanding everything they did to me. Your soulmate stared at the screen. You continued. If they disappeared, I found reasons for them. If they became inconsistent, I told myself they were struggling. If they hurt me, I focused on what had happened to them instead of what was happening to me. Your soulmate's chest tightened because they could already see where this was going. I thought empathy meant staying. Another message. Eventually I learned empathy without boundaries can become self-abandonment. That sentence struck them deeply. Suddenly your strength made more sense. Your boundaries. Your ability to step away while still caring. It had not appeared naturally. It had been learned. Probably painfully. You continued. So now when someone repeatedly makes me question where I stand, I pay attention. I don't immediately leave. But I stop explaining everything away. Your soulmate felt exposed because they knew their behavior had triggered exactly that process. Is that what happened with me? They asked. You took time before answering. A little. Their stomach dropped. When? You replied, recently. Then you explained. There had been a moment when you reached out because you genuinely needed connection. Not rescue. Not some huge romantic gesture. You simply wanted to hear from them. They had responded warmly at first, then suddenly disappeared from the conversation. Hours became a day. The next time they spoke, they acted as if nothing happened. To your soulmate, it had been ordinary. Maybe they became overwhelmed. Maybe life got busy. Maybe vulnerability triggered them and they subconsciously retreated. But to you, it felt familiar. Too familiar. An old emotional pattern wearing a new face. And instead of confronting them, you made a quiet decision. You would stop giving more energy than you were receiving. Your soulmate read the explanation with growing regret. Why didn't you tell me? They asked. Your answer was immediate. Because I had already told you before that disappearing confused me. They remembered. You had. Not dramatically. But clearly enough. And they had treated it like a small preference instead of a meaningful boundary. Your soulmate wrote, "I'm sorry." You replied, "I know." Then, unexpectedly, "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty." Then why tell me? Because you said you wanted to understand. That response changed something inside them. This was what trust looked like. You were not giving them your past so they could fix it. You were giving them context so they could understand your present. What they did with that understanding would determine whether deeper trust became possible. Your soulmate typed, I think I understand why the psychic said what she said now. You asked, what did she say? They hesitated. Then told you. She said you were at the end of a cycle. That you weren't going to keep choosing people who only recognized your value when they felt you pulling away. Long silence. Your soulmate immediately worried they had said too much. Then your response came. That's uncomfortable. They asked, because it's wrong? You replied, because it's close enough to something I've been thinking. Their hearts started racing. What have you been thinking? Another pause. Then you wrote, that I care about you. But I'm not going to convince you to be ready for me. There it was. The line your soulmate had been afraid existed. You still cared. But your care no longer meant waiting indefinitely. Your soulmate stared at the words and felt two emotions collide. Relief because you had admitted the connection still mattered. Fear because love alone would not secure your presence. They would have to choose. Not someday. Not when fear disappeared. Through action. They replied, I don't want you convincing me. You asked, then what do you want? Their fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was another moment where old instincts would have produced vague language. But tonight had destroyed their tolerance for vagueness. They wrote, I want to stop pretending I need more signs before I admit I love you. Silence. Your soulmate's entire body went still after sending it. They had said it. Not, I care. Not, I feel something. Love. Directly. No psychic needed. No symbolic language. No mystical explanation. Just the truth. You read the message. The typing indicator appeared. Disappeared. Returned. Your soulmate felt their heartbeat pounding. Finally you replied. Are you saying that because you're afraid I'm pulling away? The question was fair. Painfully fair. They remembered the psychic's warning. Are you only courageous when you sense them slipping away? Your soulmate took several minutes before answering because they wanted the truth, not the answer most likely to keep you close. Finally they wrote, maybe fear is why I'm saying it tonight. But fear isn't why I feel it. They paused. I think I've felt it longer than I've been willing to name it. You read that. Then asked, what happens when the fear goes away? There it was. The real test. Would they return to silence once they felt secure again? Your soulmate answered, I don't know yet. That probably surprised you. But they continued. And I don't want to make some huge promise tonight just because I'm emotional. I want to show you. You replied, how? They thought about every lesson from the reading. By being consistent when nothing dramatic is happening. By telling you when I'm scared instead of disappearing. By asking you questions directly instead of hiring strangers to answer them. That last sentence made you laugh. Your soulmate could tell because you replied, that would be a good start. And for the first time that night, the tension softened. Something almost ordinary returned between you. Humor. Warmth. The familiar connection underneath all the fear. But there was still one unanswered question. The psychic had described you as unrepeatable. Your soulmate had initially misunderstood what she meant. Now they finally understood. It did not mean you were some perfect mystical being. It meant you had decided not to repeat certain patterns. You were still capable of making mistakes. Still afraid sometimes. Still learning. But you were no longer willing to abandon yourself to keep another person comfortable. And strangely, that did not make your soulmate want to run. It made them respect you more. Because they realized that if you chose them now, it would not be because you needed them. It would be because their presence had earned a place beside the life you had already learned to build for yourself. That kind of choice meant more. The conversation continued late into the night. Your soulmate finally asked, "Do you love me?" Then immediately regretted it because the question sounded like exactly what the psychic warned against, searching for reassurance. You did not answer immediately. Instead you wrote, "Do you need me to answer that tonight?" Your soulmate thought carefully. Then replied, "No, that surprised you." "Why not?" They answered, "Because I think I've spent too long needing certainty from you before giving you consistency from me." Silence. Then your response, "Okay."